I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell.
This speech did not get very much attention. When a new president is coming to power, as John Kennedy was, the spotlight was not on Dwight Eisenhower.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions.
There was a feeling at the time that this must have been written by some speechwriter who just sneaked into the speech.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
3 months ago, we got contacted by a family up in Minnesota saying that we have documents from Malcolm Moose. He was responsible in part for drafting the military-industrial complex speech.
These new papers give us written evidence that this was not just some caprice of Eisenhower's or something by some speechwriter.
You see the evolution of his speech from May 1959 to 1961.
And he wanted to give this speech for a long time, 2 years.
Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea.
There was one person in Dwight Eisenhower's life whom he really confided almost everything to, and that was his brother Milton.
There's one particular document where the speechwriters had already drafted their version of the speech, only to see Milton come along and totally revamp what had already been written.
When Milton Eisenhower was taking notes and writing things on the drafts of these speeches, the speechwriters knew that it wasn't Milton talking, it was Ike.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
He would see magazines with advertisements for some new warplane or some bomb, and he got so angry he'd take the magazine and throw it into the fireplace of the Oval Office because he felt that defense spending should not be something that would be encouraged by companies who are seeking commercial gain.
We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
There is an interesting document. It shows that the farewell speech will be made to Congress. But yet, President Eisenhower decided, no, he was going to address the people.
Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
One test of how well a president speaks is how long the speech lives. Here we are 50 years later, we're still talking about this speech.
Now, on Friday noon, I am to become a private citizen. I am proud to do so. I look forward to it. Thank you, and good night. So help me God.
He just won a very close election.
About every year, the National Archives puts a new original letter from George Washington on display. This is a letter from George Washington to Henry Lee, Governor of Virginia, written on July 3rd, 1792.
For the exhibit, our goal is to prepare the document so the document will be appreciated and has no other distraction. The main problem of this document was that there were old adhesive, discolored paper tapes which obscured Washington's writing. We can immerse the document in water bath. I didn't want to do that because it still has a wonderful old cream color, and I absolutely did not want to disturb it.
The artist, William Williams, attempted to approach President Washington through a letter of introduction offered by the Governor of Virginia, Henry Lee. Washington refused this proposal to pose for a painting.
Your letter of the 20th was presented to me yesterday by Mr. Williams, but to be frank, and I hope you'll not be displeased with me for being so, I am so heartily tired of these kinds of people that it is now more than 2 years since I have resolved to sit no more for any of them.
And we believe that during the presidency, his 8 years of the presidency, he sat for over a dozen artists. But sitting for portraits was not his most favorite thing to do in life.
Besides the irksomeness of the sitting and the time I lose by it, these productions have, in my estimation, been made use of as a sort of tax on individuals by being engraved, and that badly, and hawked about or advertised for sale.
You might be in the painter's chair for a few hours. You might have to go back for return sittings 2 or 3 times.
The master of this lodge then wrote a letter on behalf of Williams to President Washington, offering, in effect, to have Washington sit for the painting, and the painting in return would be gifted to the lodge in perpetuity.
After testing, I found that adhesive respond to water. After that water softened the adhesive, I just carefully scrape away. Paper loss will be filled with archival paper that is compatible to original document color.
I called this Washington and the Paparazzi because, in a sense, this is the 18th century version of paparazzi. So you can read the letter and then see the resulting portrait and see how really unhappy he looks about the whole situation.
On June 17, 1972, 5 men are arrested in the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee in the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. President Nixon is in the Bahamas. White House Chief of Staff H.R. Bob Haldeman is in Key Biscayne. June 20th, 1972, 3 days later, was the first time that President Nixon and Haldeman talked about Watergate around the microphones.
Mr. Haldeman took copious notes of his meetings with the president. In the Nixon materials, Nixon Library, there are probably 300 boxes of his notes on yellow paper.
You can follow Haldeman's notes. The president is talking about a letter he wants to send to the governor of South Dakota. And suddenly, the conversation shifts from South Dakota to Watergate. You can see that in the notes, and the gap begins.
Since there is a gap in the tape, the notes would then be the backup to that. However, there is very little in the notes about the meeting itself.
I'm Phil Mellinger. I'm an amateur historian that's been doing some Watergate research for the past 5 or 6 years. I knew there were 2 pages of notes from the meeting, and I talked to the archivist, and he was very kind and pulled out the notes and showed them to me. And when I looked at them, it immediately hit me that this couldn't have been the complete set of notes from the meeting.
In a typical Oval or executive office building meeting for an hour and a half, there could be as many as 5 or 6 pages of notes. More than, obviously, than 2 pages.
And I knew from reading Haldeman's diaries that Nixon's inner core had gone through their files and made sure they were clean.
One thing people notice right away with these 2 pages is the multiple staple holes here, which indicate, obviously, staple removed, staple removed, staple removed.
It occurred to me that we could actually do impression analysis on the remaining pages.
Mr. Mellinger brought forth the idea that modern forensic technology might be able to reveal indented writing here on page 2 that would have been what was on any intervening pages. For the forensic work done on the notes, we first went to the Library of Congress, where images were taken of the 2 pages of notes, front and back, under varying spectrums of light. We then went to Inspector General Internal Revenue Treasury Department's lab. The paper is applied to a vacuum table, and a very thin sheet of plastic is placed over it, and the vacuum sucks the plastic in such a way that it adheres to every indentation in the paper. Then electrostatic charge is put to the plastic. Material very similar to toner from an ink cartridge is put over that, and then another sheet of plastic is put over there. An image then adheres to the second sheet of plastic, which can get peeled off, which should reveal any indented writing on that sheet of plastic.
I don't have any expectations. My hope is that the forensics will show the topics that were discussed in the meeting.
After our testing with the method suggested by Mr. Mellinger, we determined that there was indented writing on page 2, but it looks like a signature and it's illegible. A surprising finding was that at the upper left of page 1 is a date written, and on the upper left of page 2 is a number 2. These two bits of information were written in a different ink from the main body of the notes. Future historians will have to determine the significance of ink differences, and possibly in the future additional work can be done on the tape itself. We were unable to recover any additional information regarding the content of the meeting between Mr. Nixon and Mr. Haldeman.
The Magna Carta is considered by many to be the most significant document in Western history. Magna Carta means the Great Charter, and what it really does is it provides the basic rights that we have as citizens in the Western world. The right to trial by jury or punishment that is proportionate to the crime, no taxation without representation, habeas corpus, and so forth.
We decided to proceed using a lot of expertise we gained working on the re-encasement of the Constitution, the Declaration. Probably fewer than 24 documents around the world have been sealed in airtight environment.
What's important now that it's just come off exhibit is that we want to document its current condition. And we're working with a report that we wrote in 2008 that will give us a nice baseline for comparison.
There are 17 copies of the Magna Carta. 15 are in British institutions.
It's still quite flat.
1 is in the Australian Parliament, and 1 is in private hands.
Yeah, let's pack it up.
I had heard it was for sale. I went to see it the night before the sale occurred, and I heard from the curator that it was very likely that it was going to be bought by somebody who lived outside the United States. So I decided that I would go back the next day and try to buy it, and really provide it as a gift to the National Archives so that the American people could see it.
With things that are reactive to changes in humidity, such as parchment, also paintings, those two particular types of artifacts always need time to acclimate to the surroundings. We worked for a number of weeks making sure that the temperature and humidity were kept constant in the workspace. When we opened the encasement, the first thing that we wanted to focus on was whether or not the change in humidity visibly affected the parchment. It did not. Not wearing gloves is the first thing that most people notice.
See, I feel like it's pretty strong. I mean, it's phenomenal condition for its age.
And what we tell them is that when you wear gloves, it reduces the tactile sense. So if you have something that's very fragile, it's the safest method of handling.
That parchment is so susceptible or vulnerable to changes in the relative humidity and temperature. When it's on the animal, you know, it's aligned and it's under tension. And then it comes off and it gets prepared or treated because that's not a natural alignment. When it gets exposed to moisture, the collagen fibers, they have some memory that they want to realign. When we talk about mapping the document, we're basically outlining specific features because when we do the treatment, and it's such a living document, it will change a little bit. There was a lot of distortion. If that was tension caused by the mends, we wanted to release it. And the only way we could figure that out was by removing the mends.
There were 9 old repairs on the document.
Sometimes you discover things trapped in the adhesive. Looks like someone was wearing a black sweater one day.
What we wanted to do was to remove all of them so that we could flatten the parchment evenly and also get rid of old adhesive residues that had been left over from a previous campaign.
Minimal moisture is critical, so we used a mild enzymatic solution to soften the adhesive. It's a trace amount that's actually in contact with the document.
We take adhesive samples to go and have them analytically tested so that we know exactly what we're dealing with. Removing the older pairs can be very difficult. It's very time consuming. We do it very carefully under the microscope and use minimal moisture. That was not easy.
When you look at the Magna Carta, there's some drip marks on the right side and you can't read anything. Using a special camera that can focus the ultraviolet radiation, we were able to actually see what inked letters had been present in those areas. So kind of magically, what was lost suddenly is visible again.
When we choose the paper, we're looking for characteristics that are compatible with the material that we're mending or repairing. I outlined the shape of the loss and I made my repair paper slightly larger. And then that edge got thinned. And that's what gets attached to the document with adhesive.
There was a pretty significant loss here, and so to stabilize it, we put the fill in. The effect that I was trying to achieve was to just make it look similar to the surrounding parchment, which with these watercolors is fairly easy to do. None of the end painting comes in contact with the document. It's confined only to the fill. And then to reintegrate the loss so that it's not the first thing that you see when you look at the record, we just lightly tone with watercolor.
It's still very visible that it's there, but it's like camouflage.
Conservation's art, science, and history all rolled into one. The final step was humidification and flattening of the parchment.
And then we're going to leave it under restraints for 3 months or so. After 3 months, we'll take the weight off. Our anticipation is that it will remain in pretty much the same configuration.
The National Archives' role in this project was to stabilize the document and make the Magna Carta look as clear and readable as it could. But at the same time, we had to design an encasement so that the parchment could be sealed up in inert gas to prevent oxidation and make it last as long as possible. Centuries, many, many centuries.
The National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is better known as NIST, is a research laboratory which is part of the Department of Commerce.
A lot of our experiments here at NIST go on in controlled atmospheres, which is basically what we're putting inside the encasement is a controlled atmosphere. Basically, we start out with a three-dimensional model that is created in computer-aided design software. We take that three-dimensional model into another program that takes tool paths, and we can actually take that model right into the machine. We started with a 6-inch block of aluminum and machined 90% of it away. That gives us the opportunity to make this with a few joints or spots where there could be leaks.
I'll start out with a bigger tool to rough it, and in the corners the radius will be big, and I'll work my way to a smaller tool to get it to a point.
Machining out these pockets for weight reduction on this frame. I've got to take caution to make sure that everything's going right.
All right, you want to do the document and I'll do the seal, or?
So there was that day when the platform came in. We had all been holding our breath, waiting to see would it fit just the way we wanted it to, which was without any strain at all.
We took a digital scan of the document without ever having the document in possession at NIST, and we were able to transform that scan into a shape to cut the platform exactly to match it.
I think we all agree that that's something that we'd like to improve the fit.
Yeah, I think we should probably just take that, offset this whole piece by 3 millimeters.
Jay Brandenburg took it back to NIST, and when it came back, it was just fabulous. It was a fabulous fit.
When you need to be able to move this encasement, that's where our cart comes in.
The cart was a unique design to provide a platform for display. It had to be able to raise and lower the encasement when it's assembled at a display angle. So it had to be able to move very easily. It had to be able to be raised and lowered very easily.
Well, it's important to have a barrier between the document and the platform, which is metal. And so what we have is a specially designed paper. We cut it out to very carefully follow the outline of the document. Because the paper is very white and the parchment is somewhat translucent, it actually brightens up the appearance of the document. The mounting system that we use for Magna Carta looks almost like a C-clamp, and we screw it into the platform. And then what it does is it holds in place a little Mylar tab that we made that's just rounded.
Wow.
So
it's not moving. Okay. It's perfect. Perfect.
We had to come up with a way to determine whether or not what was built was actually leak tight, then assemble it.
And then right there.
We then put in the seals, the O-rings. The conservators are responsible for putting the document onto the platform and putting it in place. And put the glass on top of this. And we then put a frame down on top of the glass that is bolted down to exert the sealing force. That sounded pretty good to me. It now has the document in there and it is filled with air. So we need to get the air out. And we do this by flushing it with high purity argon, which is completely chemically inert. That gas has to be humidified to a level that is consistent with the environment that the document has been in before. Purge gas, or the flush gas, goes in one side of the encasement, passes through the encasement, and exits out the other side. And when it does, it takes the ambient gas with it. We actually reduce the residual oxygen level in the casement down to the part per million level.
The museum world, as opposed to our world, is entirely different. It's almost like night and day. We really learn to appreciate the differences and the uniqueness of each other's environment. The thing that makes me so proud of being part of this is the fact that you can bring together two federal agencies, the expertise, the knowledge, the skills, and really do something tremendous.
One of the goals in conservation is to make sure that everything you add to a document is reversible if down the line a conservator thinks there's a better way to repair this. Hi, I'm Annie Wilker. I'm a paper conservator at the National Archives in College Park. Here in the Conservation Lab, I repair documents in preparation for exhibit. The illustrated family records, probably some of my favorite documents. They were often made by professional artists or by pastors living in the town. This is an illustrated family record from Virginia that was created in the late 1700s. It records the marriage of John and Jane Tomlin in 1784 and the birth of their 5 children. This illustrated family record is unusual, the tear that goes through the entire booklet. At some point in its history, someone came along and decided to repair that tear using thread. So we loosened all of these threads and realigned the top and bottom half of the page, and then reinforced the tear along here. So this is a document that's a mock-up. I'm going to demonstrate how I fill this loss. So I would start with a piece of Japanese paper like this. Conservators like this paper a lot just because of the long fibers it has. You can see them here. So I'll start out by tracing the shape of the loss onto this sheet of mylar. You could use lots of different tools for this, but I like this because of the point on it. So now I've cut out this piece of Japanese paper to match the shape of the loss, and I'll adhere this over the mend with wheat starch paste. The archives has about 100 family records like this. A lot came following the Revolutionary War. Many women after the war became widowed, and the government offered pensions to widows who could prove their relationship. Jane Tomlin turned over her family record to the United States government in order to receive an $80 a year pension, but unfortunately that record was not returned to her family. We've done this fill here, but if this piece were for exhibit, it would be more important that the color matched better. I'm going to tone a little bit of paper now just to demonstrate. I try to mix up a color as close as I can to the original document. It's just sort of trial and error. When something goes on exhibit, we prefer that nothing catches the eye except the text and the original content and intention of the creator of the document, not the tears and the way it's deteriorated over time. Yeah, my work requires a lot of patience, but I really enjoy my job.